Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't about mental illness. It was about people who see everything others miss, and why this ability destroys them. In his clinical practice, Jung documented patients with what he called differentiated perception, individuals who could read micro-expressions, sense hidden emotions, and perceive psychological patterns that escaped everyone else. They saw through social masks, detected lies instantly, and felt the unconscious tensions in every room. Jung called this discovery dangerous because these people consistently ended up isolated, exhausted, and unable to maintain normal relationships. Not because they were unstable, but because seeing everything came with a psychological cost no one understood. Today, I'll show you Jung's most dangerous discovery about people who see everything, and why he believed this rare ability either destroys you or transforms you into something extraordinary. The case that revealed Jung's most dangerous discovery began with a patient he described in his private notes, a highly introverted intuitive type who came to him in 1913 during Jung's own psychological crisis following his break with Freud. This patient, representing what Jung would later categorize as the rarest personality type, possessed what he called undifferentiated intuitive perception. She could walk into any room and immediately sense the psychological atmosphere, who was lying, who was in emotional pain, who harbored secret resentments. Jung wrote, "The patient displays an extraordinary capacity for perceiving unconscious contents in others, but this faculty appears to cause her considerable distress rather than advantage." She couldn't engage in small talk because she saw through every social facade. She couldn't maintain friendships because people felt exposed and uncomfortable around her. She couldn't hold employment because her presence disrupted the collective unconscious agreements that keep groups functioning. Jung realized he wasn't treating pathology. He was observing what happens when the unconscious becomes too conscious, when perception becomes too differentiated for social survival. He documented her describing people with startling accuracy. She speaks of others as if she has access to their private thoughts and hidden motivations. When I verify her observations through careful questioning, they prove remarkably accurate. This wasn't psychosis or delusion. This was consciousness so advanced it had become socially dangerous. But Jung discovered something even more disturbing. Because this patient's extraordinary perception seemed impossible to explain, therefore Jung began investigating what he would later term participation mystique, the psychological phenomenon where individuals with highly differentiated intuition become overwhelmed by unconscious contents from others. Jung wrote in his Red Book period notes, "There are those among us whose psychic apparatus is so finely tuned that they absorb not merely conscious communications, but the entire unconscious atmosphere of their environment." Modern research by Dr. Elaine Aron on highly sensitive persons validates Jung's early observations. Her research shows that roughly 20% of people have heightened sensory and emotional sensitivity. But Jung identified something more specific within his psychological typology, the introverted intuitive type, comprising roughly 1% of the population, who don't just feel deeply, but perceive unconscious patterns with startling clarity. Jung observed that these individuals have what he called differentiated intuitive function. Their brains process not just obvious social cues, but unconscious emotional states, repressed content, and psychological patterns that others cannot detect. They see the depression behind forced smiles. They sense the desperation beneath confident presentations. They feel the collective shadow that groups unconsciously agree to ignore. Jung wrote, "The danger lies not in the perception itself, but in the psychic isolation it creates. When one sees clearly what others cannot or will not see, one becomes a mirror that society cannot bear to look into." This creates what Jung called the problem of the superior function, when your greatest strength becomes your greatest burden because it separates you from collective unconscious participation. But Jung discovered the real danger wasn't the perception itself. Because people with highly differentiated perception see others' unconscious contents clearly, therefore they become targets for what Jung extensively documented as shadow projection, where people unconsciously attack them for reflecting what they refuse to acknowledge in themselves. Jung wrote in Psychology of the Unconscious, "Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent." But he discovered this principle extended to all relationships. When someone's shadow is reflected back through another person's clear perception, the unconscious mind has two choices: integrate the shadow or attack the mirror. Jung documented this pattern repeatedly in his clinical work. The person who sees clearly gets blamed for creating the problems they're merely observing. His patients with differentiated intuition experienced this constantly. When they would gently suggest that someone seemed troubled, that person would explode at them for being negative or creating drama. When they'd express concern about obvious problems, they'd be accused of being judgmental or manufacturing issues where none existed. Jung realized this wasn't coincidence, it was psychological defense. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But for most people, it's easier to attack the person reflecting their shadow than to examine what's being reflected." This creates what Jung called the scapegoat phenomenon. Highly perceptive individuals often become the designated problem in every group they enter, not because they cause problems, but because they reveal problems that already exist in the collective unconscious. Jung observed, "The bearer of superior perception becomes the repository for all that the group cannot consciously acknowledge about itself." This pattern explains why these individuals don't just feel misunderstood, they feel systematically targeted by a force they can't rationally explain. But Jung's most disturbing discovery was still to come. Because Jung observed that overwhelming perception manifested differently in different individuals. Therefore, he identified 4 distinct patterns within the introverted intuitive type, each representing a different way of processing unconscious contents from others. Type 1. The feeling intuitive Jung documented patients who combined introverted intuition with differentiated feeling function. These individuals don't just see what's happening psychologically, they feel it in their own bodies. They absorb others' emotions so completely, they often can't distinguish between their own feelings and those they've unconsciously absorbed. Jung wrote, "The feeling intuitive lives in a state of perpetual emotional contagion, experiencing the unlived emotions of everyone in their environment." Type 2. The thinking intuitive. These individuals see psychological patterns and predict behavioral outcomes with startling accuracy. Jung observed they could forecast relationship failures, career disasters, and personal breakdowns months before they occurred, not through logical analysis, but through unconscious pattern recognition. Jung noted, "They possess an uncanny ability to perceive the logical conclusions of unconscious processes that others cannot yet see." Type 3. The sensation intuitive Jung documented patients who could sense the physical manifestations of psychological states in others, detecting illness before symptoms appeared, sensing fatigue before it was acknowledged, or feeling the bodily tension that indicated emotional distress. Jung wrote, "These individuals serve as early warning systems for psychological and physical dis-ease in their environment." Type 4. The pure intuitive. The rarest type Jung encountered combined introverted intuition with what he called undifferentiated auxiliary function. They saw everything, but had difficulty organizing or expressing their perceptions coherently. Jung observed, "They live in a state of perpetual overwhelm, receiving vast amounts of unconscious information without adequate psychological structure to process it constructively." Understanding your specific pattern is crucial, because each type requires different approaches to what Jung called the integration challenge. But first, You need to understand why Jung considered this discovery so dangerous. Because Jung observed the devastating effects of undifferentiated perception on his patients, therefore he concluded that seeing everything without proper psychological integration posed genuine dangers to both individual and collective well-being. Jung identified 3 specific dangers that made this discovery so threatening. Danger 1. Collective unconscious disruption. Jung wrote, "The individual who perceives too clearly threatens the collective agreements upon which social cohesion depends. When someone sees through the shared illusions that hold groups together, the unspoken agreements to ignore certain truths, they become a destabilizing force." Jung observed that organizations, families, and societies function partly through collective unconscious agreements about what will and won't be acknowledged. The highly perceptive individual inadvertently violates these agreements simply by existing authentically. Danger 2. Psychological isolation. Jung documented how differentiated perception creates what he called the problem of superior function, when your greatest psychological strength becomes the source of your greatest suffering. He wrote, "The curse of consciousness is that it cannot be shared with those who do not possess it. The individual becomes an island of awareness in an ocean of unconsciousness. This isolation isn't just social, it's existential. These individuals often report feeling like they're living in a different reality from everyone around them." Danger 3. Identity dissolution. Most dangerously, Jung found that people who absorb unconscious contents from others often lose contact with their own authentic personality. They become so flooded with external psychological material that they can't distinguish between their own inner world and what they're absorbing from their environment. Jung called this participation mystique, a state where psychological boundaries dissolve and the individual becomes merged with collective unconscious contents. He wrote, "The danger is not merely social exile, but psychological annihilation, the complete loss of individual identity in favor of collective possession." This is why Jung considered the integration of superior perception not just therapeutically important, but psychologically urgent. Because unintegrated superior perception posed such dangers, therefore Jung developed what he called the individuation process, a systematic approach to maintaining individual identity while developing conscious relationship with unconscious contents. Phase 1. Recognition and differentiation. Jung taught his highly perceptive patients to first recognize when they were absorbing psychological material that wasn't their own. He called this conscious discrimination, the ability to distinguish between authentic inner experience and unconsciously absorbed external content. Jung wrote, "The first task is to establish what belongs to you and what belongs to others. Without this discrimination, there can be no individual development." Technique. Jung instructed patients to spend time in complete solitude daily, allowing absorbed material to settle so they could recognize their own authentic psychological voice. Phase 2. Shadow integration. Jung discovered that people who see others' shadows clearly often do so because they haven't integrated their own. The more you deny your own capacity for deception, selfishness, or cruelty, the more disturbed you'll be by seeing these qualities in others. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, but only if we have the courage to look inward, rather than remaining focused outward." Shadow integration means acknowledging that you contain every human quality you observe in others. This doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a complete person who can see clearly without judgment. Phase 3. Conscious participation. The final phase involves what Jung called conscious participation in the collective unconscious, the ability to engage with others' psychological contents without being overwhelmed or losing your individual identity. Jung wrote, "The individuated person can serve as a bridge between conscious and unconscious, helping to make the unconscious conscious in others without sacrificing their own psychological integrity." This requires developing what Jung called psychological containers, the ability to hold others' unconscious contents temporarily while maintaining awareness that they are not your own. Because Jung understood that superior perception either destroys or transforms individuals, therefore he studied historical figures to understand the difference between successful integration and psychological breakdown. The case of Nietzsche, unintegrated perception. Jung was deeply influenced by Nietzsche's philosophy, but observed how his superior perception ultimately led to psychological collapse. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Jung wrote about Nietzsche's ability to see through social, religious, and philosophical facades with devastating clarity. However, Jung noted that Nietzsche never learned to integrate these insights constructively. Instead of using his perception in service of healing, he wielded it as a weapon against society. Jung wrote, "Nietzsche possessed extraordinary insight into human nature, but he remained identified with his superior function rather than integrating it into a balanced personality." Jung observed that Nietzsche's isolation and eventual breakdown represented what happens when superior perception remains unintegrated. The individual becomes consumed by what they see rather than transformed by it. The case of Meister Eckhart, successful integration. Jung extensively studied the medieval mystic Meister Eckhart, whom he considered an example of successfully integrated superior perception. Eckhart possessed what Jung called mystical intuition, the ability to perceive spiritual and psychological realities that others could not access. But unlike Nietzsche, Eckhart channeled his insights into compassionate service. Jung wrote, "Eckhart transformed his superior perception into wisdom that could nourish others without overwhelming them. He saw clearly, but spoke in ways that invited understanding rather than resistance." Jung noted that Eckhart's success came from what he called conscious humility, the recognition that superior perception is a gift to be shared wisely, not a weapon to be wielded. Jung's own integration journey. Most significantly, Jung documented his own struggle with overwhelming perception during what he called his confrontation with the unconscious from 1913 to 1919, recorded in the Red Book. Jung wrote, "I was menaced by a psychosis and was saved only by my ability to understand what was happening to me through my work with patients. His superior perception of unconscious contents, both his own and others, nearly destroyed him until he learned to integrate these experiences consciously." Jung's breakthrough came when he realized that his overwhelming perceptions weren't pathological but evolutionary. They represented consciousness attempting to evolve beyond current collective limitations. This realization transformed his approach to patients with similar gifts. Because individuals with superior perception often face isolation, therefore Jung emphasized the crucial importance of finding what he called the few who understand, others capable of engaging with differentiated consciousness without defensiveness. Jung wrote in The Development of Personality, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But this privilege cannot be realized in isolation. It requires witnessing by those capable of recognizing authenticity."
Tá tudo ótimo.
Jung identified 3 essential types of relationships for the highly perceptive individual. Type 1. Fellow individuated persons. Jung wrote, "The individuated person recognizes another individuated person immediately. There is a quality of presence, an authenticity that cannot be fabricated. These connections often happen instantly and intensely. You recognize each other as members of what Jung called the conscious minority. These relationships are rare but essential for psychological survival. With fellow individuated persons, you can be completely authentic without fear of overwhelming or threatening them." Type 2. Those engaged in individuation. Jung observed that people actively engaged in their own individuation process, therapy, inner work, spiritual practice, can often handle superior perception without defensiveness. They may not possess it themselves, but they understand its value. Jung wrote, "Those who have begun to know themselves can bear to be known by others." Type 3. Natural containers. Jung identified individuals who, while not possessing superior perception themselves, have what he called natural container function, the ability to hold psychological content without being overwhelmed by it. These might be mature individuals who have weathered significant life challenges. The recognition process. Jung developed specific indicators for identifying safe relationships. They ask genuine questions about your observations, rather than immediately defending against them. They can acknowledge their own contradictions and limitations without shame. They demonstrate what Jung called psychological mindedness, interest in inner reality. They maintain emotional stability when confronted with uncomfortable truths. They show genuine curiosity about consciousness and growth. Gradual revelation protocol. Jung taught a careful process for revealing perceptive abilities. 1. Begin with small, gentle observations. 2. Notice their response pattern to feedback. 3. Assess whether they become defensive or curious. 4. Gradually increase depth based on their demonstrated capacity. 5. Always frame insights as offerings rather than pronouncements. Jung emphasized, the goal is not to find people who accept everything you see, but to find people who can engage with your perceptions as valuable contributions to understanding rather than threats to their self-image. Because integrated superior perception serves both individual and collective development, therefore Jung viewed successful individuation as essential not just for personal well-being, but for the evolution of human consciousness itself. Jung wrote in The Undiscovered Self, "The individual has always been the carrier of the living spirit, the one who brings about the change in society." He believed that individuals who successfully integrate superior perception become what he called culture carriers, people who help consciousness evolve. The 4 stages of transformation. Stage 1. Recognition without overwhelm. The first transformation occurs when you learn to acknowledge your perceptive abilities without being crushed by them. Jung called this conscious acceptance of the superior function. Jung wrote, "The beginning of wisdom is the recognition of what one actually is, not what one wishes to be or fears to be." Stage 2. Integration without isolation. The second stage involves learning to use your perception constructively while maintaining meaningful relationships. Jung called this social individuation, becoming authentically yourself while remaining connected to others. Jung observed, the individuated person does not withdraw from the world, but engages with it more consciously. Stage 3. Service without sacrifice. The third transformation happens when your perception becomes a gift you offer, rather than a burden you carry. Jung called this conscious participation, using your abilities in service of others without depleting yourself. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and then to offer that authentic self in service of the whole." Stage 4. Legacy without attachment. The final stage involves what Jung called transcendent function, using your perception to contribute to collective consciousness evolution without attachment to whether others recognize or accept your contributions. Jung observed, the individuated person works for the future, not for personal recognition in the present. The integration becomes cultural medicine. Jung believed that individuals who successfully integrate superior perception serve a vital evolutionary function. They see what collective consciousness is not yet ready to acknowledge, helping to prepare humanity for necessary developmental steps. Jung wrote, "What is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate." Highly perceptive individuals who learn integration help make unconscious contents conscious before they manifest destructively in collective behavior. But Jung warned about specific pitfalls that can derail this transformation. Because the path of integrating superior perception contains specific dangers, therefore Jung documented the most common ways individuals derail their own transformation process. Pitfall 1. The inflation trap. Jung wrote extensively about psychological inflation, when individuals become identified with their superior function rather than integrating it consciously. In 2 essays on analytical psychology, he warned, "The danger is that the ego identifies with the archetype, leading to an inflation that cuts the individual off from human relationships." Highly perceptive individuals often fall into what Jung called the prophet complex, believing they must save everyone from unconsciousness. This leads to preaching, judgment, and eventual isolation. Jung observed, "The moment one believes oneself to be the bearer of absolute truth, one has fallen into the trap of unconscious possession by the very forces one seeks to understand." Pitfall 2. The withdrawal. Justification. Jung documented cases where individuals used their superior perception to justify complete withdrawal from society. They convinced themselves that others were too unconscious to be worth engaging, which Jung recognized as spiritual superiority masquerading as wisdom. Jung wrote, "True individuation requires engagement with the unconscious world, not escape from it. The hermit who withdraws from life has not transcended it, but has been defeated by it." Pitfall 3. The helpers high. Jung observed that some highly perceptive individuals become addicted to being needed. They define themselves entirely through their ability to see and help others, losing contact with their own inner development. Jung warned, "When perception becomes identity, the person disappears behind the function. This is not individuation, but its opposite, the sacrifice of personality to role." Pitfall 4. The overwhelm return. Even successfully integrated individuals can regress during periods of stress trauma or major life transitions. They stop maintaining their psychological boundaries and become flooded with others' unconscious contents again. Jung emphasized, integration is not a permanent achievement, but a dynamic process requiring constant conscious attention. The integration maintenance Jung developed ongoing practices for maintaining healthy integration. Regular solitude for distinguishing your own psychological contents from absorbed material. Conscious choice about when and with whom to engage perceptive abilities. Ongoing shadow work to prevent projection of your own unconscious contents. Connection with others capable of providing reality checking and support. Creative expression as an outlet for overwhelming perceptual input. Jung wrote, "The integrated person does not achieve perfection, but learns to dance consciously with their own psychological complexity." Because Jung understood superior perception within the context of collective psychological development, therefore he viewed highly perceptive individuals as serving an essential evolutionary function for human consciousness. In The Undiscovered Self, Jung wrote, "The individual has always been the carrier of the living spirit, the one who brings about the change in society." He believed that people with superior perception serve as what he called consciousness pioneers, individuals whose psychological development precedes collective readiness. The historical pattern. Jung observed that throughout history, individuals with superior perception often appeared before collective consciousness was ready to integrate their insights. They served as advanced scouts for psychological territories that humanity would eventually need to explore. Jung wrote, "What appears in the individual first as psychological insight later manifests in the collective as cultural transformation. The individual serves as a laboratory for consciousness experiments that will eventually benefit the whole." Modern manifestations. Jung believed that in the modern era, highly perceptive individuals might be sensing psychological patterns that explain collective behavior, environmental and social unsustainability before it becomes obvious, spiritual possibilities beyond current religious frameworks, technological implications that others haven't considered, collective shadow contents that need conscious integration. Jung's insight: the sensitive individual feels the collective problems first and most intensely. Their personal symptoms often reflect what the entire culture needs to address. The service without martyrdom. Jung's crucial insight was that superior perception serves evolution best when it's integrated consciously rather than suffered unconsciously. The goal isn't to be a martyr to consciousness, but to be a bridge between what is and what's becoming. Jung wrote, "The individuated person serves the collective not by sacrificing their individuality, but by developing it so completely that it becomes a gift to the whole." The ultimate integration. At the highest level of development, Jung observed, individuals with superior perception hold their abilities lightly, seeing clearly without attachment to others, accepting what they see, perceiving deeply without compulsion to fix everything they observe. Jung called this the transcendent function, the ability to serve consciousness evolution naturally, without forcing or preaching, simply by embodying more conscious ways of being. Remember Jung's patient from 1913, the introverted intuitive who came to him during his own psychological crisis? After 3 years of working with Jung's individuation process, her life transformed completely. She learned to distinguish between her own psychological contents and what she absorbed from others. She found work as a counselor where her differentiated perception helped troubled individuals. She built relationships with people who valued her insights rather than fearing them. Most importantly, she stopped experiencing her superior perception as a curse and began understanding it as what Jung called a gift requiring conscious development. Jung wrote about her transformation. The patient learned not to see less, but to see more wisely, not to perceive less deeply, but to engage more consciously with what she perceived. Her gift remained intact, but her relationship to it became integrated rather than overwhelming. This represents Jung's most dangerous discovery, that some individuals are born with consciousness that exceeds collective readiness, and this advanced perception will either destroy them through isolation and overwhelm, or transform them into exactly what humanity needs for its psychological evolution. Your superior perception isn't a malfunction in your psychological makeup. It's an advanced feature of consciousness development. You're not broken because you see everything others miss. You're psychologically ahead of your time. The question isn't whether you should suppress your perception to fit in with collective unconsciousness. The question is whether you'll develop the individuation skills necessary to integrate your perception consciously. Jung's individuation method offers a path from dangerous isolation to conscious service, from overwhelming perception to integrated wisdom, from psychological curse to evolutionary contribution. You were born to see everything, not to suffer in silence, but to serve consciousness evolution. The world needs your insights, but it needs them delivered with the integration, wisdom, and strategic awareness that transform dangerous perception into cultural medicine. Your gift is not your burden. Your unconscious relationship to your gift is your burden. Learn to integrate it consciously, and you become exactly what Jung believed highly perceptive individuals were meant to be. Consciousness pioneers, preparing humanity for psychological development that is inevitable but not yet obvious. Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't that some people see everything. It's that most people who see everything never learn to use what they see wisely. The danger isn't in the perception itself, but in failing to develop conscious relationship with extraordinary abilities. You are not too much for this world. You are exactly what consciousness evolution requires, once you learn to wield your perception as consciously as Jung learned to wield his. The danger of seeing everything isn't that you see too much. It's that you might never learn to see with the integration and wisdom your gifts demand. If you recognize yourself in Jung's description of the highly perceptive individual, you're part of a rare psychological type that Jung believed essential for consciousness evolution. Share in the comments which type of differentiated perceiver you are. Your individuation journey connects with others walking the same path. Subscribe for more insights into Jung's discoveries about psychological development that transcends collective unconscious limitations. If you're ready to explore more of Jung's insights about psychological types that don't fit conventional patterns, check out my video on 7 dangerous Carl Jung psychology places that destroy your mind, where I reveal the psychological environments that are particularly toxic for highly sensitive and perceptive individuals, and Jung's strategies for protecting your consciousness while engaging with an unconscious world. Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension.